James Cameron is a hack. Also, Nintendo might be greedy. This is your weekly roundup. Hello, everyone. This is the best podcast in America. Today is December 2nd, 2016. We are finally nearing the conclusion of 2016, much to the relief of a lot of people in America. I'm here with Sam.
Hello.
And so today we decided to discuss messages in movies. We can talk about movies that fail in their messaging and also movies that are successful in their messaging. Because there's always this divide between critics and popular audiences, right? Mm-hmm. Just because a popular audience likes a movie doesn't mean critics do. Just because critics like a popular movie doesn't mean the popular audience does, right?
Right.
Does the message of the movie fail because we think it fails critically, or does it actually fail because even the audience doesn't really buy it? Mm-hmm. Because just because you and I think something fails in its message doesn't necessarily mean that the movie as a whole is a failure.
Right. A movie could succeed even though the critics absolutely hate it.
Right. So a good example of this might be Avatar, James Cameron's Avatar, to be precise.
Ugh.
So Avatar, the joke with Avatar was that it was Dances with Wolves with Smurfs. There was a lot of critical blowback to this movie in some sense because a lot of people were like, technology is bad, why don't we all just live in a commune in the woods, that kind of movie. Avatar, in terms of its characters, was probably as simplistic as Titanic. I know some of the people listening might be like, what? You think Titanic was bad? The characters in Titanic were a bit one-dimensional.
Hold on. Are you saying that you think the characters in Titanic sunk?
They really did sink.
They sunk the movie.
They sunk the movie. And that movie sunk my expectations. So Avatar was a very critically acclaimed movie. Mm-hmm. Okay. Avatar made a lot of money. The question is, why did Avatar make a lot of money? And I think that the answer is probably in the same way that Titanic made a lot of money.
Well, I know a lot of people went to the theater. I know a lot of people bought tickets. And a lot of people went to the theater and bought a lot of tickets many times over and over and over again. Back with Titanic, I remember seeing it in the movie theater. I have to be honest, I was one of these people who was fanatic about the film. I saw it twice in the theater. I heard of people, however, seeing it 40, 45 times, 65 times. This is not overestimating. This is not hyperbole. People saw it 65 or more times in the theater. There are news accounts, if you go back in the archives of the late, great 90s and look them up online, you'll see that people, in this news footage, how many times have you seen the Titanic? Oh, I've seen it, probably 45 times. This is there. And yes, the movie touched my heart too, but I saw it twice in the theater.
It's well documented that the actual advertising for Titanic changed over time, right? Mm-hmm. At first, it didn't seem to have this kind of romantic plot that was the centerpiece of the final product, essentially, this relationship between Jack and Rose. At first, the advertising we saw for Titanic seemed to be this kind of almost thriller movie. You've probably seen the popcorn
right, the Plinkett popcorn.
The Plinkett popcorn, where Titanic has almost like this chained background. It's like Titanic, right? It seems like an action thriller. And all of a sudden, in terms of marketing, it's like Celine Dion got involved, and all of a sudden it's a romantic movie. And I think that was probably a marketing decision based on James Cameron.
There were a certain cadre of films back in the 90s. As soon as something became popular, they would make a song out of it, and then they would have the remix version. Titanic was one of these, so you can go back and listen to the version of My Heart Will Go On from Titanic with movie clips. You can go back and listen to the theme song from Jerry Maguire with movie clips. You can go back, you can listen to the Friends soundtrack that was turned into a remix song. They played it on the radio too. My point is that they did this on purpose because they had this niche audience that really liked the emotional, romantic edge of these films and TV shows. They liked the song because of its emotional pull and the connection with those characters and the romantic interests of the characters.
True. They definitely took that element and amplified it, which is probably why it was successful in a lot of ways, right?
Right, because you couldn't turn on a radio in the late 90s and not hear one of these songs.
12 Angry Men, of course, is a 1957 film directed by Sidney Lumet. It stars Henry Fonda, and was adapted adapted from a teleplay by Reginald Rose. It's kind of worth mentioning that there was also a 1997 Henry made-for-TV remake that was directed by William Friedkin. That kind of had like a more diverse cast, I guess you could say. One of the main messages behind the movie is that it's about a man fighting against the majority in this instance and trying to prove the innocence of someone who feels like it's against him versus the world, essentially, right? I think the problem with 12 Angry Men is that the kid was probably guilty. The problem is that the kid has no alibi. There were also no additional suspects in the case. So all of the evidence also that Henry Fonda's character brings up in the movie is pretty circumstantial and not enough to actually absolve the guilt of the kid. There's really no reason to call for not guilty when there's no evidence of guilt elsewhere. Mm-hmm. It's like, yeah, okay, we absolved the kid of the crime. Who did the crime? We don't have any suspects. You're going to say the kid is not guilty. Okay, who else did it? Well, we don't have any other suspects. That wouldn't fly in a court of law, I should point out.
Right, generally speaking, you have to have some sort of alternative explanation for what happened, some other interpretation of the facts that leads in another direction. Right. So we need some sort of clearance with the issue, and the film doesn't give it, and there's that lingering question in the air. Well, if the kid didn't do it, who did it? Who did the crime?
I want to kind of shift to a political standpoint here.
Okay.
I know a lot of people at home are like, oh, Chase is going to interject politics into this conversation. I can interject politics into anything. Okay.
Spoiler alert.
Okay, so I read an article by John Nolte from the Daily Wire, and he was talking about filmmaking in terms of politics. And he was doing a comparative analysis between, films made during the Bush administration versus the Obama administration and kind of the overarching messages attached to those films and whatnot. Nolte was thinking about, in the future, what is filmmaking in the Trump administration going to look like, right? Because even Nolte can agree that a movie with political messages that he doesn't necessarily agree with can still be good, because John Nolte admitted that he thought that the Vietnam War was overall morally defensible, but despite his stance on that issue, he still says that movies like Platoon and Apocalypse Now are still well-made films, even if he doesn't necessarily agree with their message. But he was, talking about the fact that some of the films made in the Bush era felt a little too overt in their criticisms, where it's too on the nose.
I have a view of what entertainment does in this country. Entertainment makes fun of and mocks those in power and their policies and their positions, everything to do with them, with the exception of leaders that those in the media like, which is why Barack Obama got a pass when it came to most of this from the media, this type of critique. And you can go back to the early tapes of The Tonight Show to hear Jay Leno harping on this, by the way. He would say, there's no way we can make fun of this guy. He's too cool. The media likes him. So when politicians start to lose that veneer, that's when the media can go after them and start lambasting them. Trump will not have a honeymoon with the press. They're already against him. That's because that's what the press is doing in this country, especially the popular presses. They lambast leaders because they're critiquing them and they're threshing them and their policies. So what type of films are going to come out? Pretty much what we saw during the Bush administration and the Reagan administration, and in some ways the Clinton administration at certain times. Those that hold the leader to a certain standard only so that they can get an entertainment value and make $1 off of it.
And perhaps even worse than the Bush administration as well. That's a possibility.
Well, sure.
But it's kind of fascinating. I wanted to, make a comment about Trump in the DC Bombshells, which, if you don't know, DC Bombshells is kind of like an alternate reality where female superheroes are on the front line in World War II.
You're talking about the DC universe.
Set in the DC universe. And Harvey Dent was basically recast in this universe as a Donald Trump figure. He even visually looks like him in the comic book. And he says lines like, we're going to return Gotham to its golden age, which is basically just saying, let's make Gotham great again, right? Mm-hmm. So that might be like an indication of what we're going to be seeing in the Trump presidency. I was thinking about this too in terms of the Bush presidency, because we think about something like Episode 3, right? Episode 3 had a lot of overt, references to the Bush administration and criticisms.
And you're talking about Star Wars Episode 3.
Star Wars Episode 3. And some of the allegories in Episode 3 were things like Anakin saying, you're either with me or you're my enemy. And that was a clear reference to when Bush said, either you're with us or you're with the terrorists, which he made that statement immediately after the 9/11 attacks.
Right.
So for me, and of course Padme in the movie says, "So this is how liberty ends, with thunderous applause." It's kind of like, I feel like in the Trump administration, we're probably going to be seeing more overt messages along those lines, maybe even to a greater degree.
Trump has been drawing from tropes that have already been lambasted by the media. So a lot of the moves that Trump has made, I think, was predicting some of this. So even if this starts up, I'm looking for ways that Trump might actually try to flip this or pivot away from this toward his advantage, because I think he's been playing the media as much as the media has been going after him. But at the same time, I do think you're right. It's going to be nonstop. There's going to be an onslaught of this.
I do think that there's a point you just made where the cultural climate for, say, President Bush was far different than, say, the climate for Trump is, right? Because I think that Trump can react in certain ways, and even his followers expect him to react in certain ways that we wouldn't have expected from, say, how Bush might have reacted to media, right? Mm-hmm. Because, you know, some of the things conservatives have said over the years is that Republicans don't really have a spine to fight back against the people criticizing them. And then they say, well, look at Trump. Trump is now this kind of, you know, this pit bull who fights back against anything anyone says against him, right? So it will be fascinating to see Trump reactions, and if he takes to Twitter to talk about anyone who depicts him, because as we've seen before, Trump has, you know, voiced criticisms of Saturday Night Live when they've had depictions of him on there. Let's talk about James Cameron's Avatar again, right? Mm-hmm. Because we're kind of going in different realms here. And there's a fascinating point about, you know, this blurring when we infuse our movies with political messages and whatnot, this kind of taking reality and trying to actualize that on the screen. For a lot of people, filmmaking, films in general, are vessels for escapism. So when James Cameron's Avatar first came out, there's this notion of Pandora-induced depression, which was basically this idea that people were depressed when they watched the movie that they could not travel to Pandora, which is the world of Avatar, the planet where the Smurfs live. Mm-hmm. They had to cope with the reality, the reality that they could not live with that, and they had to kind of return to our world, so to speak. Avatar blues, ironically enough.
You know, it's funny, when the NES came out back in the early to mid 80s, there was something in the media where people were calling themselves Nintendependent. They had to stay in this fantasy world, and they couldn't escape out of it.
We have to cost this much. Where should the anger be directed? Not at the parents, but at the manufacturer.
So it has come to this. Therapy sessions for families whom you could call Nintendependent.
First of all, the peer pressure starts. I feel maybe exploited.
So I think there might even be a linkage here with video games.
Well, yeah, there's this notion of retreating into sort of false realities, right? To cope with the actual harshness of reality. We kind of see that with the Avatar phenomenon, this Pandora-induced depression. Fiction, video games, and all of those sort of related concepts, they're really outlets for venting emotion in a lot of ways. You know, especially for a lot of young men who feel like their roles in the world are diminished in recent years. A lot of them look to video games. You know, why do you think Call of Duty has such a young male fan base, right?
Right, and it's probably why they buy the game when it's released and re-released over and 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 over. It's the same game, people. You're buying the same game over and over. But yes, I agree.
So they're outlets for venting emotions. I just have to say, you did an unboxing video for the Mini NES. Correct?
I did. I opened the box and I showed what was in it. And
the link for that will be down below. Do you believe that when you went to purchase your NES that there might have been like a shortage of them in terms of products?
Wait a minute, Chase. Are you implying that Nintendo might have some sort of scheme in which it intentionally creates a false sense of scarcity in the market, which causes people to later engorge themselves upon the product when it's released later in the year or the next year, and actually causes them to buy other products in the same shelf of the same provider, this case being Nintendo, and then uses this as a means of gaining attraction in a marketplace that otherwise may not give them much attention? Is that what you're saying?
No. I would never insinuate that Nintendo are greedy frauds. Greedy frauds. I would never do that.
I'm sorry, I was totally off base.
Black Friday. Nintendo had this deal for the new Nintendo 3DS. They planned to release 2 models of this, and they were maybe not necessarily budget, but that's kind of what it was. There was a black and white model, and they were planning to release this for $99.99. So a flat 100, which is a good price because new Nintendo 3DSs tend to range from something like $170 to $200. Basically, you could probably get almost $100 off. Good for a lot of people.
Now, this is the new 3DS, not the new 3DS, and not the new 3DS, and not the old new 3DS.
Well, I never knew that there were so many new 3DSs.
Well, there was an old 3DS, and then there was a new old 3DS, and there was a new 3DS, and there was a new 3DS.
Well, you'll note the difference when it doesn't come with a charger.
Yeah.
So, a lot of people on Amazon are very disappointed because this product was intended for Black Friday, the new Nintendo 3DS in both a black and white version. And so a lot of people were discussing their dissatisfaction because they believe Amazon put the product on its page for sale in advance of Black Friday, and a lot of people ended up buying the products for the lower price and ended up trying to resell them as a third party on Amazon at a much higher price. You know, we're talking about they bought the products for about $99.99 and ended up reselling for almost $160 to $170.
Well, Chase, I can't really throw stones regarding this point.
Why's that?
Okay, in order to explain, I probably should give a little backstory for this point. So, on the night of November the 10th, right before midnight, about an hour before midnight, that night I went out to my local big box retail store and waited in line with 4 other individuals for the 12 new Nintendo devices, in this case not the new 3DS or the old 3DS, none of those, and it wasn't the Switch device, no, this was the new mini NES. The re-release of the old system, now with HDMI and all the goodies. And within 5 minutes, mind you, all 12 of those products were sold. And I bought one for myself, and I bought one to resell online. Gasp. Yes, gasp indeed. So I was able to sell this other product online. It took me 5 days to sell it on Craigslist. Well, in this case, one of the people wrote back, and I was going to sell it to the person, and I waited even. I said I'm gonna wait for this person this night. They said they're gonna call me back. They never did. I had to put off making dinner, and then I call them, and I say, I think you meant to call me back. And they said, I'm sorry, I can't do this right now. I'm having dinner. I said, well, yeah, that's kind of what I was going to be doing, but you didn't call me back. Anyway, that person, I made up in my mind they were not going to get it. I knew it just wasn't going to work out. Finally, the person who did decide to buy it, we did the transaction. He let slip this little nugget of information. He said, I really shouldn't be doing this. I think I'm just trying to buy back some of my childhood. The reason that I sold this was so that I could use it to finance a trip. And it's like, well, this is going to become gas money. But there are some people who are making serious money off of reselling these things. So I have a feeling that some of these newer products, especially for where most of them are sold online, are closer to the drop shipping deal, in which there's actually algorithms doing this now.
Yeah, that's kind of my experiences too. One thing that I found kind of interesting with what you said there is the reasoning for why the man bought the mini NES from you, actually. He said that he wants to relive his childhood. I think it's worth pointing out that how that connects to our larger point when we're talking about Avatar and whatnot, and this idea of induced depression because people want to escape to the false realities, right? For that man, it seemed to me that he was willing to pay a high price just to relive fragments of his childhood.
Well, I wouldn't say it was a high price, but one of the things that the mini NES does very well, it has this attract mode that when you turn on the device, and let's say you're not initially playing a game, let's say you just leave it there on the screen, its screensaver is basically an attract mode. It'll start showing clips of the various games that you could be playing. And I remember back in, I believe it was, what was the year that the original Metroid came out? 1989, something like that?
1987.
Oh. So I was back in Toys R Us, back in Kentucky where I was from. There was a Toys R Us, and they had these little slips of paper that you had to pick up from the cabinets, where they had these huge game cabinets where they had dozens upon dozens of new video games. You would take the piece of paper from the envelope in front of the cabinet where there was a monitor where the game was playing. You would take that piece of paper over to basically, it's like a hostage negotiation. You take the piece of paper over to another place in a far corner of the store. You trade the piece of paper for the cartridge, and then you have to give them money. This sort of situation had these monitors, these displays, in what they called attract mode, where the game was playing. And back in 1991, Super Mario World had this. So if you, in the back of your mind, if you can hear the Super Mario World theme, what was it like? Dun 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 dun. Dun 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 dun. Exactly like that.
And so on.
So that is attract mode, where that's going on and you see a clip from the game going over and over and over. This is what the Mini NES does, and it's banking totally on nostalgia. And the question is, why on earth would a product want to sell you the game in attract mode when you've already bought it? That goes back to the motivation for Nintendo and what it's doing and nowadays in its marketing scheme. It is selling you something you practically already have, but it is licensing it to you new. It is selling it to you in a way that you can't say no because it's within the store that Nintendo has is within your own home.
That's a good point. It would make sense from a marketing angle if the reason why they have the attract mode playing and whatnot, all of these screens playing, is if they were, say, planning to update the system, right? Perhaps there's a download, and they will install more games onto the system, so it's almost like a preview of what's to come.
Right.
But you're right that it's kind of counterproductive for them to be playing games that you've already purchased. And I think that there's a good point to be made that, Nintendo kind of is implementing this philosophy of you don't really own the games you buy. You're essentially buying a license to play them.
And if you go back to, what was the name of that remake on 3DS? The remake of A Link to the Past.
A Link Between Worlds?
A Link Between Worlds. When you play that game, and those of you who've played this game, you know exactly what I'm talking about. There's a character in the game who breaks into your house practically and lives there and sets up a shop. And you don't, in that game, really go out to the dungeons and find items. You have to rent them from the guy. You're just getting a license to use your equipment for most of the game. And Nintendo, in setting this up, is basically, if I may be allegorical here, is basically taking its marketing scheme about video games and putting it within the video game. It's being meta upon meta upon meta here. And this always bothered me in playing the game. I thought, why can't I just go to a dungeon and fight an Octorok or a Tic-Tac or... no, wait, Tic-Tac, that's Kesha, that's something else.
Tic-Tac?
Tic-Tac, no, that's something else. Why can't I just fight one of these Dodongos? That's it. Why can't I go fight a Dodongo and get a boomerang? Maybe that's not how it works. Anyway, why can't I just fight a Dodongo, throw a bomb at it, and get something else? No, you have to go rent your equipment. And then later, maybe if you're lucky, you can buy it if you store up. Nintendo is all about the monetization of its IP properties now. Even the new Super Mario Brothers, the second release on 3DS, about the quest about all you do is go around finding golden coins. Golden coins were always in the Mario games, all the way back to Mario Brothers. In the sewers, you'd find money and put it in your pocket. Who'd have thought that'd be a good idea? But now these games are about just the acquisition of wealth. And just to be collecting this stuff. It's like, yeah, we're just going to take out the middleman now. Now it's just about collecting money. That's it. That's the whole game.
Well, there's something similar in one of Nintendo's other IPs, which is, of course, Pokemon, one of their biggest money makers.
Wait. You're saying that Nintendo has made money off of Pokemon?
Maybe just a little bit.
Just a little? Okay.
But yeah, just a little.
Okay.
But I have to say that, okay, so there's technically an app for the 3DS called Pokebank. And the idea of Pokebank is that you can store your Pokemon on the bank. They give you about 3,000 slots to store your Pokemon from across your generations. So you pay for the subscription yearly. It's a yearly subscription for $5. Pokebank has become a stand-in for a feature that was included in a lot of other games, which is backwards compatibility between generations, right? Mm-hmm. So you could transfer between Diamond and Pearl, which was the 4th generation of Pokemon, to Black and White, which was the 5th generation. And there were actual mini games you could play that allowed you to transfer between generations, right? Mm-hmm. Now Nintendo has decided to capitalize on that, and instead of giving a free option to transfer Pokemon between generations, you pay a yearly fee on Pokebank to transfer between games, just to have your Pokemon onto another game.
So a feature that was free before, because it's on the app now,
has become a yearly subscription.
Oh, where have we heard this before? Xbox owners, or PlayStation owners, or insert game system here owners.
Yeah, Nintendo is pretty good at finding ways to get money out of its consumers. I think that we could all agree with that.
The absolute worst part about the new Mini NES has to be the coin slot. I can't believe they put the coin slot there. And the thing is, I didn't have change the other day. I had to go down to the store and get quarters just so I could play the game.
Man, Nintendo, they take 3 steps forward and 5 steps back. Or maybe it depends. How much is each step?
I don't know. It's a quarter for Mario jumping. It's 5 cents for... I don't know. So, by the way, I was thinking about how Nintendo has gotten better over the years in monetizing things within the games. Case in point, the Final Fantasy I had this interesting little constraint. Let's say you're a band of warriors. You go out and you fight these monsters. You go out there and you fight the monsters and you do the quests, and you're coming back and you're tired and you say, oh, I just need to stay in the inn and I need to get some healing potions. So you go to the store and you buy a healing potion, and you know what they can do? They sell you 1 healing potion. And then how do you get the second one? You go back into the menu and say, buy. Next, healing potion 1. Buy. Next, healing potion 1. You could spend your whole life tapping and tapping and tapping and tapping on the button just to get a healing potion. Just to get 10, 20, to take in the dungeon so you don't have to crawl all the way back and go to the inn. Tap after tap after tap after tap. And then if you want to get a potion that, say you get poisoned and you need to have a pure potion to heal the poison, you have to go back to a different menu and then hit the button again. And then when you go to use your item, let's say you picked up a different item in the field, you can't arrange your items in the pack. You just have to find where the thing is and then use it. And then you use it and you come back, you have to find the item all over again. At the very least, in the remake of this, Nintendo and other companies, when you look at the remake of Final Fantasy I, for instance, on PlayStation, they fixed this bug. There was also another bug with Final Fantasy I in which, let's say you've got 2 guys in your team who are attacking a monster, and you say, Joe, attack the monster. Bill, attack the monster. And let's say Joe takes the monster down and it's gone. Bill will still swing his weapon in the air wildly and say, ineffective. It doesn't work. Why? Because the monster's gone. The new versions of Final Fantasy, the remakes, the sequels, do this a lot better. If you miss the monster because the first person in your team took it down, your attack follows through to the next monster, which is how it should be. Anyway, ever since then, Nintendo has gotten a lot better about this, but these particular flaws were preserved for the Mini NES version. There's one issue where they actually made the game worse, however, and that is with the save feature. I'm actually opposed to a save feature in video games. Emulators had the save feature. The Virtual Console on the Wii had the save feature. What this does is it takes the difficulty level of the video game and it cuts it in half or more. And this is one area where the technology has really dropped the ball. Video games do not need to be any easier. Now, I don't know why companies haven't thought of this. I'm sure Nintendo is going to hear this podcast and they're going to jump on the bandwagon. Nintendo, if you're listening, what you need to do if you're going to monetize a little further, take the broken factor of the video game, take the save state idea, which you've taken apparently from other software that have done this, and what you do is you save the game in a spot where it's right before the victory, and then you sell that. What you need is the credit card swiper, or now you'd have the chip reader in the Nintendo system. Now you do that, and you sell the save state to the person. Let's say, Nintendo, take me to the end of the game. You put your chip reader card in there, you pay the $9.99, and then you get to see the end of the game. That's what Nintendo needs to do now. It needs to sell and resell victory experiences, because now it's not only too difficult to play the game, it's too difficult to defeat the game. So why not just purchase that while we purchase the system and the games that we've bought 5 times already?
Thank you all for escaping into our reality tonight. Next week, we will be talking about farms and factories. I hope that you'll join us.
It's a great new card game. We can't wait to take a peek.
This was our weekly roundup. Get ready to gear up for the next weekly roundup. Henry